All right, welcome everyone to our TIA Lunch and Learn. This is the last one for 2020, so we'll start up our Lunch and Learns again in January, so keep an eye out for those. We'll have promotions and things like that going out as we get closer to those. But we don't want to bombard you guys with a ton of marketing and things like that over the holidays. So
yeah, you saved the best one for last too.
So. Yeah, definitely. So our webinar today is Getting People Right. Our presenter is Ryan Schreiber with Carrier Direct. He's the Director of Client Engagement. And our sponsor today is Carrier Direct. So before we get into it, I'd just like to go through a few housekeeping items. First off, the TIA antitrust and confidentiality statements. Discussion, comments, and presentations during TIA functions must not refer to any past, present, or future rates, prices, or anything related thereto. Include any reference to marketing strategies, include any discussion of boycotts of any person, product, or firm, or inhibit any members' employees from discussing employment with other member companies. So with housekeeping items, please submit questions as you think of them during the presentation. We'd love to have your questions at the end. Hopefully we get a lot of questions. And then we'll close out the webinar with questions. We always leave the last 10 minutes or so open for Q&A. And then you'll also be receiving a recording and a copy of the slide deck after the webinar, so keep an eye out for that. It should get to you by tomorrow afternoon. If not, it might be stuck in spam, so check there first. But if you haven't received it by tomorrow afternoon, just send me an email, and I can get that over to you. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Ryan.
Hey everybody, Sean, thanks a lot for having us, and greetings of the season to everyone who is joining. Glad to be the last one. Like I said, earlier, sort of save the best for last, if I can say so myself. So quickly, just a little bit about Carrier Direct. So you guys kind of know where we're coming from. We're a technology and delivery and management consulting firm, and we focus exclusively on freight and transportation. So we work with companies like Redwood Logistics, Nolan Transportation Group, Werner, JB Hunt, FedEx, smaller companies as well. From everything from process improvement to organizational design to compensation, recruiting strategies. We help with technology strategy. We do technology development as well. We only swim in this pond of transportation and logistics. And so we know it really, really well. And I'm here to share kind of a little bit with you guys today of what we see, from some of the top companies in the industry and where we see companies struggle from a people perspective. A little bit about me as well. I'm the director of engagement for Carrier Direct, which means, I focus on engaging with our clients. I've spent over 10 years in the industry before joining Carrier Direct as an operator, and I've started multiple brokerages. And what I want to kind of share about that is my most recent brokerage was a tech-enabled broker. We were applying natural language processing, or we were using chatbots to drive internal efficiency. And we were building all of our technology from scratch at that company, and we did it with people at the center of everything we were doing. So even though we had this technology thesis, people really still powered our business. So people and technology are not at odds, even in technology-focused businesses. And then when I joined Carrier Direct, I saw that same thing playing out across the industry, that great companies really put their employees at the center of all of their decisions, and that technology is an and to your people, in that you need people and technology to win. And if you've ever heard me talk anywhere else before or followed me on LinkedIn, you know that I think technology is undeniably important, but people definitely need the limelight too. And without question, what we see at Carrier Direct time and again is that great technology absolutely cannot make up for bad people or bad organizational design. But great people can definitely cover for some of your technology deficiencies. We've seen that play out multiple times across the industry, but you really need both to win. Today, we're going to focus on people. And what we see is the most successful companies have the right people in the right positions contributing to that strong bottom line. And so over the next 45 minutes, I'll share my goal is to leave you with some real actionable things to take away to your business, as opposed to just word vomiting at you for a little while. So we definitely have a lot to cover. So I used a Seinfeld meme over here. I've got a lot of problems, and I'm going to tell you all about it. Gave you the introduction kind of already. We're going to focus on culture, probably the hardest thing for most companies to kind of wrap their hands around. You certainly, kind of what culture isn't, but how to actually affect it. Then we'll touch on organizational design, what that is and how it's really vital to your company, how it's vital to the health of your company, and also really, really essential for recruiting. And then we'll talk about the different types of training. Training we'll spend a bunch of time on. And then we'll talk through offboarding as an opportunity. And then I'm going to leave you with 3 real quick hitter opportunities that we see in most businesses. And I'd be willing to bet you'll be able to use in your business as well today. Like I said, my goal is to leave you with actionable takeaways. Definitely feel free to submit questions here, or reach out on LinkedIn later. And certainly I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys have. Let me know if you think this was actionable at the end of this, because if it wasn't, I'll be really disappointed in myself. All right. So what's culture and how can you impact it? Keep in mind as you think about this, from what we see at the top performing organizations, they're ones that think about taking candidates and employees on a journey. Just like you would with your client, right? Thinking about how you want an individual to interact with your brand is really, really vital from what we see. And this starts with the first time somebody even hears about your company, whether that's a candidate or a customer or carrier. And it goes all the way through your entire business relationship. You want to be really intentional about what you do and how it impacts the way individuals feel about your company. And so as a result, impacting culture really starts with that first interaction that someone has with your brand. And I'll talk about recruiting a decent amount on the next slide. But what we find, this is going to focus on kind of that culture piece. And so what we find is that people today, and not just millennials, they want to be taken on a mission when joining your company. You're going to hear that concept a lot throughout today's presentation, that mission. But even in this current economic climate, folks are pickier than ever. We're hearing across the industry that people are still having trouble recruiting and finding kind of that right talent, which we'll talk about. But they're pickier about what they do and what companies they do it with. And you can create this idea of a mission within your company. Your employees are going to thrive. And we'll talk about multiple ways in which that happens, but your talent level will also go up, right? And so it's easier to define what culture isn't than what it is, because culture is not pizza parties. It's not a Papa Shot. It's not beer o'clock on Fridays. It's not work hard, play hard. Look, a lot of those things are important, but they're not culture. They're buzzwords, or they're just kind of manifestations of trying to manufacture culture, right? The struggle from what we see is that good cultures and bad cultures, they seem to happen by accident to folks, but they don't. You can't manufacture it with a Papa Shot or with beer o'clock. But what you can do is impact it. And ultimately, your brand and that mission building towards that is how people inside and outside kind of feel about your company. And so let's talk through 3 ways we've seen to build that mission and really impact culture in a really tangible way. Number 1, do what you say and share more than you think you should. And I won't spend a lot of time on this section because it's probably pretty straightforward. You should take every opportunity to look for opportunities to be vulnerable to your employees. And these are 2 really great opportunities to do that by by following through on things and sharing more than you think you should. Look, these are table stakes for top performing organizations. They do these 2 things absolutely better than anybody else, unequivocally from what we see. So when you make a commitment to your employees, you have to do everything you can to follow through. But if you can't, it is vital to communicate what's changed and then own that failure. Hey, I did not make this happen. Here's why, and here's what I'm going to do about it. Or here's what has changed and why that priority is now different. The other thing is it's really hard for leaders from what we see to track these commitments, right? You have a lot going on. So 2 best practices that we've seen across the industry that really helps folks track those commitments. First, add a timeline add a timeline to your commitments. So like I'll follow up with you within 2 weeks about this thing that we talked about. Adding that timeline puts that pressure on yourself as to when to follow up on it. Be realistic about those timelines. Don't say you'll follow up tomorrow on something that's going to take you time to sit down and really think about or gather information on. But adding that timeline helps you hold yourself accountable and helps that teammate hold you accountable. And then the other thing is develop a system to track those commitments that you've made. Whatever that system might be, it might be just like a list on your desk or a sticky note, but making that system to track those commitments can make it easier for you with everything that you have going on. Sharing, the concept of sharing a little bit more than you should, it's trickier. Remember earlier I said that individuals want to be on a mission and they want to think they're a part of something. And sharing more than you think you should is a really great place to start. Look, I understand that you can't share everything with teammates and candidates, but what you can do is share a little bit more than you think you should, right? We're talking about incremental steps here. I understand that you don't share for multiple reasons because it doesn't matter or they don't need to know or you want them to stay focused. I've been in your seat, right? Because you're trying to protect yourself or them, you don't share. But bringing them inside that circle of trust really helps build that feeling of the mission that I've talked about. And that you're in this together. You're teammates. You're not employer-employee. Both of these things make leaders and companies seem more vulnerable. They build resonance and they help create that mission. The second thing that you can really do to impact culture, invest in your people. And I'll talk more about this later, but it's worth pointing out now that the best way to impact your culture is to show your people you care about their development. And finding time for this can be really hard, right? You have business realities, they're taxing, I get that. But the top performing organizations, they don't indiscriminately invest heavily in training. What they do is they find excuses to keep doing a little bit more, right? Instead of finding excuses as to why they can't do it. They make time, they find time, they understand the value of that time and the investment, as opposed to saying, I need to get these people on the floor. I've got to get them making calls. We just don't have the time to do it. We're understaffed. The reality is you're always going to be in that situation. It's like having a kid. You're never ready to have a kid, right? You just sometimes at some point you have to find the time or you have to make yourself ready. You invest an incredible amount of time and energy to recruit these new employees, and you have to invest in their continued success. And investing in your people is the surest fire way to improve your culture from what we've seen. The reason is my dad would always say, actions speak louder than words. And investing in your people improves culture for that exact reason, that obvious reason. You can tell people you want them to be successful, but this shows them that you're invested in their success and that you're on this mission together. Training's expensive and time consuming, but it's absolutely essential. Like I said, I'm going to spend a decent amount of time talking about it later. And another major reason that folks don't tend to think about the training helps with your culture is that it gives leaders the positive skills to positively manage. And it demonstrates that your company's invested in the future and not just the bottom line, because it takes time to do. Employees and teammates, they know that it takes a lot for anyone to do training. And so because of that, doing the training shows that you're making that investment. The last one I'll say is the last one here is get rid of bad apples. Because a straightforward path to unhappy town for your team members is when they feel like a company cares more about the money than the money that's coming in than their well-being. And I know that there are people here rolling their eyes or saying, yeah, I already know this. You're not telling me anything I don't know. I've been in your chair. I know I've made these mistakes myself of not doing it, which is why I'm bringing it up. Bad apples are the biggest reason for a bad culture, as much as training is the biggest reason for a good culture. That's from what we've seen unequivocally across the industry. And the top performing organizations, they move on from bad apples quickly. Bad apples aren't just employees, by the way. They can be customers that are impossible to deal with, and are always looking for a problem, not just the employees who are sucking the life out of, everyone around them. Obviously, the best way to get rid of bad apples is to make sure you do the work on the front end to identify the right fit. That's why recruiting that we're going to talk about is going to be really important. And while I don't touch on the sales cycle and how important it is to qualify customers, that, identifying them there is obviously the best way to keep bad apples out of your business. But when you create this brand and this mission, what we've seen is that with the right culture there, with the right mission, when you get really good at these things, bad apples are going to surface early on as individuals see them, and they feel more comfortable saying something about it. Either in recruiting, I don't think this person fits because of these reasons, or when somebody's already there. And I'll touch more on that later when we talk about offboarding. It's easy to get rid of bad apples that don't hit their numbers or where the freight isn't there. But the big money customers or the team members that hit all their KPIs and are always on their grind are a lot harder to kick to the curb once they're inside, right? But the truth is you need to move on to them yesterday. Like I said, I certainly understand all the reasons that you're not doing it, but don't wait. I've made that mistake myself, and we've seen it play out time and again across the industry for carrier direct. There is a cost to that toxicity. This damage can spread across your organization. It can take months, if not years, to repair. And the reality is, what we see that people aren't thinking about is that you're losing other folks, right? The good ones are leaving, and the ones that stick around aren't nearly as productive because of these bad apples. And so what we see every single time, your employees will thank you. And equally importantly, your business will be fine because everyone will be so glad the bad apples are gone. They will more than pick up the slack. They will rise beyond the level of what the replacement would be for this bad apple that you've gotten rid of. We've seen it play out myriad times. It's a fact that you need to do it now. So show your key people that you care about them by getting rid of the bad apples. Certainly it's painful, but it's absolutely necessary. Take a little sip of water there. Next, let's talk about organizational design, talent, and recruiting. We very specifically don't talk about the top talent. You're going to hear that kind of throughout. And the reason is, it's just like any other buzzword, it's really taken on a meaning of its own. Synergy, whatever. You just kind of throw these things out there these days, right? And today, top talent, it's just what looks good on a resume. It's not what will impact your business. We talk about the right talent. The right talent starts with looking inside your business to build on the organization you have and that you want. And the example that I use, kind of two examples here a lot of times that help this resonate. Magic Johnson, as a Michigan State guy, Magic Johnson is inarguably one of the best basketball players of all time. I'd argue that he's the best, but let's take that argument offline. Hit me up on Twitter or don't at me. He is inarguably top talent though, right? I mean, everyone would agree with that. But if you take, unless you're a Wolverine, I guess, but if you take him and you stick him in center field, he doesn't look like top talent, right? If you're the Tampa Bay Rays, you get Magic Johnson, you sign him, hey, this is going to be great. Stick him in center field. You're like, why isn't this guy doing that well, right? Another example that I use here is Babe Ruth. If the Yankees trade for Babe Ruth and they stick him in center field, that trade doesn't look like they came out like gangbusters. Inarguably, they're top talent, but these examples show that they just didn't fit what these organizations are trying to do. And I'll come back to that in a minute. So the first bullet here, before you think about recruiting, you have to have a handle on your organization. You need to know who you are. That's what we refer to as organizational design. You need your organization to fit your strategy. And that's how you'll win, where you'll play, and what'll make you different from everyone else. You need to get really granular in there on what people's responsibilities will be day to day and what tasks folks will complete to ensure that they don't duplicate effort and that everything builds towards your overall strategy. So here's where that example with Magic Johnson and Babe will really land, right? It's easy if you don't do organizational design, right? It's easy to know that you don't need Magic Johnson if you're the Tampa Bay Rays. But it's a lot harder to know that you shouldn't take Babe and stick him in center field. That's why org design is important, right? And so the example really tangibly here for intermediaries is if you are a cradle to grave shop and you hire a killer customer salesperson from a buy-sell broker, she is going to fail miserably because you didn't design the organization to support someone like her. That is the example of taking Babe and putting him in center field. She's used to having carrier sales. And so any success that she has at your company is essentially luck, right? You've definitely hired, most folks have hired somebody from a different type of organization and they've succeeded, but that was luck. It was not anything other than that. That's why you have to think about this before you do recruiting. And so then once you've defined your strategy, like such as buy, sell, or cradle to grave, there's myriad strategies across your business you need to look at for org design. You need to know your roles, have well-documented job profiles. And then really importantly, here's kind of the tactical piece of this. Ask yourself, do those things align with what people day-to-day job duties actually are on the floor in your organization? Because what we see time and again is that companies that are struggling with growth or profit is that what's happening on the floor isn't what they've designed or what they've had in mind. And they usually know it. They just struggle to do anything about it. And then so often what happens is recruiting departments go out with a job description in hand that doesn't align with what's happening in the company. And there's a ton of thrash that goes on with that. So you end up bringing in people that will hopefully change your model, and it doesn't, because there's that work foundationally that needs to be done. I could spend this whole time talking about organizational design. It's certainly, I enjoy it. It's a little bit esoteric, but the other 4 talking points on this slide that we'll touch through are about recruiting. So the second one, to find the right candidate for a role. Know the ideal candidate looks like, right? This is where I'm going to come back to the difference between top talent and the right talent. Everyone wants to focus on top tier talent. You want the top tier of the right talent, certainly, but everyone focuses on top talent. And that actually makes for a smaller labor pool, not a larger one. And it leads to higher churn from what we've seen. And so if you've done your organizational design work, you have a leg up here, certainly, but there's more to do. So instead, concentrate your efforts on getting the right talent for the job, for the opportunity and the job to maximize, the return in your company. You are building a team with different strengths and weaknesses. And so your goal needs to be putting the right people in those roles to maximize that potential. 2 quick tips from what we've seen here that can help. Number 1, a good place to start is by looking at people you currently have or have had in the past. And look at their successes and failures and kind of like see where that overlap is. That can be difficult, but what does that profile look like? And what has led them to be successful or not? Looking back on your organization can be a great place to start there. The second one is longer term and more forward looking. Look to standardize your interview process. And use things like interview guidelines to do this, because what this allows you to do is compare apples to apples, that you're able to measure results over time in your hiring decisions. You can go back because you've memorialized what you saw in the interview process. And also, that in that process, you're comparing people along the same parameters and not just what somebody had for breakfast. Those are 2 really quick things that you can do today to help move the ball forward in understanding what the right candidate is. The third bullet might sound a little bit more obvious, right? But figure out where people are and go there and kind of do that extra work. But what that means is don't look for them to come to you. And the important part is do that extra work. So as an example, if you want to focus on college grads, right? Go to a college, but then go to the college recruiting fairs, you're doing that stuff, but do the extra work of something like getting in with the Career Development Center, right? Don't just show up at the job fair. Why, that's really valuable because they're the ones who have the pulse on the students, right? And their goal is to get students jobs. Your goal is to hire great candidates, great students. They're going to pre-recruit for you when you have that relationship from what we've seen within the top organizations, right? And so you create that work and they're doing some of that extra work for you that you don't have to put in. So go a little bit further. If you're looking to recruit experienced talent, go to local networking events as an example, or even better, create one for yourself. Putting in the effort to host industry events, and I cannot be more clear about this, not just recruiting events for your company, but ones that focus on leveling up the industry or on education, something that's going to drive real value to candidates that you're looking for. It's going to allow them to self-select in. And both of these help to add to that mission that I talked about before in 2 ways. Number 1, shows your people that you're really willing to work hard for them to improve the organization. You're constantly challenging them to be more active, not just post and pray, not wait for the phone to ring. Do the same thing, right? On the recruiting side, to level up the talent of the organization. And then the second is that you're showing that your company is leading the space in the way that they approach problems. The fourth bullet on here is sell it, right? Sell your company, your brand, and the mission. Recruiting is sales. This easily could have been in the culture piece, but recruiting is sales, and you have to think about it like that. And just like any sales, what we see from the best companies is that they put their customer at the center of the journey. And they're intentional about the journey from first interaction to closing. And in this context, in recruiting, the process or the candidate, right, is your customer. So here's some things that we see from top performing companies. First, top performing companies really focus on humanizing the process and not thinking of them as candidates, but like customers or like future employees. Even if you're only hiring 1% of them, they focus on the experience a candidate will have, because that incremental effort makes a huge difference on the ones who end up joining. And I'll touch on that a little bit more later. They do things like thanking candidates for applying, and they do what they can to kind of like make candidates feel appreciative of the time that has been shared. They clearly communicate with candidates when they can expect to hear back, what the next steps look like, what all the things are that are going to happen between now and a potential offer letter. These companies meet their commitments and their deadlines, and they promptly respond to candidates, even when a candidate's going to be rejected or is rejected. And that goes as far as even when candidates aren't going to be offered a phone screen, because there's an ecosystem out there. People are talking about your brand. A candidate you want may talk to somebody you rejected. And if the experience that the candidate that you rejected had was that you're kind of not very nice, I was going to use a harsher term, not very nice, you're not going to get that candidate that you really want to even apply. Interviews, they also, top performing companies here in Humanizing, interviews are more like conversations. They're not interrogations, right? It's not the company selecting the candidate. It's each selecting each other. It's a lot more like dating, right, than it is anything else. For what it's worth, my wife had to pick me. Like I was going to pick her, obviously, but if anybody's met my wife, which most of you haven't, interviews are more like conversations. They're not interrogations, right? So that's another thing we see in terms of humanizing. And the last thing I'll say about humanizing, they use words like you, not the candidate, in job postings, right? So like, you will be responsible for cold calling customers, not the candidate will track and trace shipments. Another thing that top companies do here, they sell that mission, right? Companies that struggle seem to focus on disqualifying candidates more than looking to see if there's a mutual fit, which ties into what I said before. So they can't kind of explain why the candidate should choose the company in a way that resonates, because even when that question comes up, the company has been thinking more about whether to or how to disqualify the candidate or whether they should choose the candidate, right? So you need to be able to explain why your customers are asking what differentiates you. Your candidates want to know the same thing. So top companies, they really sell the candidates on what's good for the candidate. Things like training, not just happy hours. That's what gets them excited about the opportunities within your business. They sell them on the mission. People care about things more than just money, right? They care about that team. They care about the mission. You have to be able to speak authentically and credibly to what you've been crafting to sell that mission. And by the way, like, it ends up saving you money. Another thing they do here, top companies, they make it easy to apply. They simplify the application process. If you ever talk to an external recruiter, which I would imagine a lot of you have, this is something they talk about all the time. Don't ask someone to transcribe their entire resume. Top candidates don't want to spend 45 minutes on an application when they've got LinkedIn. It's 2020, unfortunately, in many ways, but it's 2020, right? It's all on their LinkedIn. Candidates are asking themselves, when you do that, if you're going to waste my time filling out this piece of paper, what else are you going to waste my time with when you get there? Remember that the people that you want the most are typically often actively employed. So they're applying at night or on the weekend. You need to make it easy, just like you want it to be easy for your customers to transact business with you. So you can do things like making sure your application is mobile friendly or asking for only the information you need to figure out whether or not you need a phone screen. You can work with software platforms that can pull in all their LinkedIn info. They're really cheap, right? And that's ways to make it easy to apply, but you still get the information that you need. Remember, you have got to close. It's sales. Remember that you need to close the candidate to get them in the door. Next, don't drop the ball with onboarding. And that's the last one here. In the interest of always be closing, onboarding is incredibly important, just like you onboard a customer. Doing it well is making sure that the new hire has the information they need to be successful and feels connected to the company. What we see at top companies is that they spend that extra effort to get it right here because it has really far-ranging implications. Misses here are things that stick with the employee during their entire tenure, and the exceptional experiences go even further to reinforce that mission. Something that we've seen at top companies we really, really love here, pair the new hire with a cross-functional onboarding buddy. This helps that create that sense of mission that we've talked about by not having them so focused on just their team and just their team members. They have a better sense of the broader organization and how their actions impact the success of other teams. They do things like get lunch with their buddy on the first day, and you structure touch points kind of throughout the first few months, and it really reinforces that relationship. Keep in mind, onboarding starts before their first day, by the way. Think about things from the perspective of a new hire to do this effectively. Like identify the information that they need before showing up on their first day and be excited, not just where the office is and what time to show up. If you haven't been a new hire yourself recently, like sit down, like gather that information from your team, have an honest conversation about how newer team members felt prior to their first day and what would have been helpful. At a minimum, stay in touch with new team members from offer letter to first day and not just with the legal and onboarding paperwork, right? Call and let her know how excited you are that you're going to start and invite other team members to do that, including the onboarding buddy. That starts to make them feel more connected to your business. Another little sip of water. Okay. This absolutely training like might be the most important thing that we're going to talk about. Because the bottom line is, like, unequivocally, if you're not investing in training, you're losing money. I'd imagine that like there's myriad reasons. I'll talk about several of the reasons here why. But that's what you have to, if you're one of those shops that says, man, we're just so busy, like, and I need people on the phone, I'll talk to you why you're going to cost yourself money. I would certainly imagine that every single person has heard that their people want growth. And one big reason to invest in training is that when we hear growth, most often we think that means, these kids nowadays, like they just want every day, they want a raise, they want a promotion. It doesn't mean growth doesn't mean that. It means career growth, right? And it means helping upskilled team members is a really good place to start from what we've seen throughout the industry. Your employees are absolutely begging for this training development. We find that every single time we go to a client, it is the number one most requested area from team members. More training, more development opportunities. So, and honestly, like if you don't give it to them, they will try and find a company that will. You're not just competing against other companies in transportation and logistics in that sense, right? They'll leave the industry. Wouldn't we all have loved to do that before we got here? But realistically, right? The best part about training and development is that it's good for both you and your people. It's good for the company. Employees are able to personally and professionally grow. They're more engaged. Their morale improves with a sense of purpose and knowing that the company cares about them and wants them to grow. This all ties into that mission, right? I talked about this on the first slide. It's great for your company because it takes a lot of time and energy to do, and your employees know that. It's also great for your company because people learn those new skills and become more valuable assets that help you prosper. I know it's difficult to find time, but here are the two biggest reasons that it's costing you money from what we've seen. The first, employees are less effective without it. So you end up hiring more people, which costs you money to get to the same places that you want to go. You end up hiring orders of magnitude more people to get to your 50 million, 100 million, 200 million, 500 million, because employees are less effective individually because they haven't been trained. And second, and maybe more importantly, you're going to lose the good ones and you're going to be stuck with the rest, right? So, or you're going to have to pay in just raw dollars more money to the good ones to get them to stay, because there's what else is in it for them besides the money? As I talked about before, they want to think about what's in it for them. You want to sell them on what's in it for them. So we break training into 3 buckets. The first, new hire; the second, ongoing; the third is developmental. And I'll talk through what's kind of different in each one of them and what you need to be thinking about. New hire training, I like to say, it's not just for rookies anymore. What we've seen at top companies is that 6 months in, an effectively trained new hire is orders of magnitude further along than the one who isn't. And companies that struggle, they worry about not having time, or not having the time to waste with employee training. They got to get them on the floor right now. New hire training is more than orientation and onboarding. It certainly starts day one or even before day one. If you think about implying it in your in your onboarding, it's everything it takes to get your new hire ramped up to be that fully functioning employee. Even if what you think you're sharing is redundant in some respects, what we see over and over is that even seasoned industry professionals, they learn new things in training. Because even if they know the industry, they don't know your business. And it's easier to hold them accountable when you know you've trained them on what you want them to know about the industry and your business, right? Unfortunately, more often than not, new hire training can really feel like drinking from a fire hose. All things are thrown at them in those first couple of days, from Wi-Fi passwords to customer contacts to signing up for benefits. People, realistically, they don't retain all of that information. They focus on what they think they need to know, and it's really actually difficult for them to figure that out. As a result, our number one tip for new hire training: be focused and intentional about the amount of information that you're giving them, and focus on what's important to defining who you are and what it'll be like to work with you, right? Spreading the training out over the first several weeks doesn't mean that they can't be productive early on either. In fact, it means they're more focused and effective in the areas you need them, and helps their ramp longer term. As an example, instead of training on every single industry term in the first few weeks, if you're going to have a person help with track and trace, the first couple of days that they're there, start by focusing them on what they need to do to confirm pickups, right? And the terms, where they look in the systems, everything, but nothing more. They're able to be effective. They're able to retain the information and put it to use quickly, and then come back and build that information over time. During the new hire period I mentioned, by the way, the buddy can be really effective here, because they're going to feel more comfortable voicing concerns to someone who's not their manager, right? And so keep in mind what's going to give a new hire that kind of peace of mind that you're looking for. And I mentioned this earlier, but it bears repeating in tip number 2. And it's tip number 2 here under new hire training: make sure you're training on the right stuff. A huge miss we see all the time is training on that ideal state, and it doesn't match what's happening on the floor. And employees at best feel lost, and at worst feel lied to. I'm not saying don't improve what's going on the floor, but training on ideal state is not the first best way to do that. That's when you really did kind of waste your time in that new hire training. Training doesn't just start and end with new hires either. So continuing training and investing in that really, really drives towards that mission. So for ongoing training, we have found that most companies simply aren't doing this, or developmental training for that matter. Ongoing training is training employees on things that help them get better at their core job, but are not necessarily essential, right? This is things like in-depth Excel training or training on industry happenings, at a high level, that helps them develop professional skills, but they're going to be okay without them, right? Developments in your service offerings and things that really pertain to their role in the company can be another good example here. So 2 big tips here. Number 1, ensure that it's relevant. Don't just train to train. Make sure you're training employees on things that make a difference in the work that they'll do every day, and communicate the so what, right? Why should they care? How are they going to apply this information? Make sure you get down to the so what. How do I want you to apply this information? Don't leave them to figure that out, and focus on actionables, right? What do they need to walk away with? What can they do? The second on this one, use training as an opportunity to kind of reinforce the mission, visions, and values of the company. That really reinforces that mission. This is also, by the way, an opportunity to tell them what you told them. Look, the reality is people aren't going to retain everything from their first few days, right? And they just went through new hire training. So retrain on systems and software or common things that you want them to retain. Training once on anything just isn't enough for people to remember what you need them to take away. Setting a cadence with ongoing training will help upskill your labor force by reinforcing what you want them to know and will enable them to go to the onto that next level of their job. Last thing here, developmental training. Developmental training can be continuing education, conferences, things like that, that give people broader sort of context and expertise. But it's also things that you can offer your employees directly. We have found that most companies definitely aren't doing this one. And if they are, it's minimal. Employees are really thirsting for this. Show employees you're invested in their growth. It drives real value. A perfect example here is things like manager training. Most first-time managers are thrust into that role and because they were good individual contributors, and they're left to figure out how to manage on the fly, and they really struggle, right? Because it was like they struggle with, hey, this was easy for me. Why isn't it easy for anybody else? But even if you're training your managers, think about doing it for everyone else who wants it, whether they're managers or not. It helps them grow as people. It helps make them better teammates, even if they're not in that position, because they understand their managers better. And also helps you understand your bench and who might be great. And your best individual contributors aren't always your best managers. And then when they become managers, by the way, some of them, they're even more prepared and productive. Continuing education is where kind of that cost become the biggest blockers. So focus on residual benefits, right? And ways to put this into practice that lower the overall cost. So incorporate training in your activities. If you're doing manager development training, as an example, task employees with some capstone project after each module that adds bandwidth to your internal initiatives and helps them improve, right? How many things do you have you're working on that you just don't have time to focus on? And then maybe after an employee attends a conference, have them share what they've learned in like an ongoing training session so that it lowers the overall administrative burden on training, and it helps you get a sense on how valuable that was. Next is offboarding. Certainly not the sexiest topic, but focus on turning losses into gains. Look, people are going to leave your company. It's just the way of the workforce today. And you stand to lose a lot every time you lose somebody, right? And you got to have systems in place. And I'm not just talking about technology here, right? And this is stuff you already know, right? People are leaving with institutional knowledge in their heads. Every employee, regardless of their position or tenure, has something that you want to retain. You know, and losing an employee can really have an impact on morale and culture. Something we see at top companies is that they celebrate the transition of employees to make to their next thing, because it provides them a way and provides them a way to stay connected. Like with online alumni groups or things like that, it can be a great place for previous employees to stay connected to your brand, to your team members, et cetera. The reality is they're doing it anyway, by the way. And if they had a poor cultural or offboarding experience, what they're sharing with their teammates still in your company is how great it is on the other side, which is going to increase your churn. It may be counterintuitive, but it actually reduces your turnover in two really powerful ways when you celebrate it. First, you've created an environment where moving on is not the worst thing that can happen. And people know that you're bought into their long-term success, and they're happy when colleagues are celebrated, right? Because if you want them to be successful, whether it's with you or not. And the second is a direct corollary to that environment that you've created. People are more likely to bring up issues because this is a place that they want to be, or at a minimum, they know that you know that there's life after your company. So raising their hand becomes less risky. On the flip side, as I talked about earlier with bad apples, make sure you get rid of toxic employees, right? Like offboard, you know when it's time to move on. Regardless of your path forward, this is not a time for what I say, like pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, right? The Wizard of Oz. Let people know what they can expect, because it's still a loss of headcount, and and people want to know what's going to come down the pipeline. So minimizing the impact of loss of skills and knowledge to that transition period. Number one, manage that period. Don't just walk somebody unless you have to, right? So don't just walk them out the door, and don't just have them focus on executing on their core job. Take that time to fill in any of the gaps that you may have about what they've been working on that the rest of your team members need to know, and be intentional about backfilling. Don't just hire a clone of that person. Both of those will help you flatten the learning curve and help you upskill help you level up your organization as you go. Actually conduct an exit interview. You can get a pulse on your company's current culture, certainly, at that time. Do this for everyone, even if they've left on their own accord, or even if you've let them go, and focus on like what your company is doing well and where you can improve. And then lastly, on this point, do something with that. Because look, it's really easy to reject everything these people have said because they're leaving. But where there's smoke, there's fire. So dig in and figure out what's emotional bluster and what's real. I know we're running a little short on time, but I want to leave you with these three opportunities we see in every single business. They're pretty quick hitters. So we see under the hood of a lot of businesses, right? And these are three quick wins we see for improvement really frequently. First, coaching. Look, most people think they're doing coaching, but what they focus on is what to do. And too often we see leaders stop at communicating what the output needs to be. The reality is your team members are not missing goals or having suboptimal outcomes because they don't understand what to do. They struggle with how to accomplish their goals. So coaching comes with a knowledge share. It's not a step-by-step how-to micromanagement, right? But it's sharing tips and tricks. So instead of focusing on what buttons to click, coaching is sharing, hey, here are 3 to 5 ways I found to have success reaching your goal, right? And then like in a week, let's talk about it. And that last part's the most important, is the follow-up. Give team members time to try things out and see what works and doesn't, and then actually come back together and review that experience, not just the outputs, right? So say a carrier rep struggling with bouncing trucks, and what you want them to focus on from having worked with them is that front-end communication. Hey, when and where's your truck going to be empty and available, to try and lower the amount of bounce trucks they have, so they, because you think they'll get better information on the front end. So when you come back together to review from a coaching perspective, it shouldn't be, well, you still bounced 10 trucks this week, man. The conversation should be, hey, how did that approach work? And where did you see success? Where didn't you? Keeps the conversation moving forward, and focusing on the tips and tricks gives people time to try it out, and reviewing not the outcomes, but the experience. Both of those drive improvement and keep the experience from feeling micromanaging. The second is overlapping job profiles and responsibilities. When I touched on I touched on this with organizational design a little bit earlier. Freight is absolutely complicated, and being an intermediary, our only asset is is to be able to deliver that service to our customers. And so our natural instinct is to say, I need to build in this redundancy to make sure nothing falls through the cracks. But this is actually one place where trying to build that flexibility into your operating model actually really substantively hurts your productivity. Well, we often see two problems with this approach. The first is an attempt to kind of like make sure all the work gets done. And so you assign multiple roles, overlapping responsibility, right? So as an example, a BDR and an account manager are both supposed to follow up with the customers for quotes. The second way we see this play out is kind of a generalization of job profiles to reduce that back office complexity. So since like employee A does tasks 1 through 10 and employee B does tasks 3 through 12, they write one job profile for tasks 1 through 12. The rationale is it kind of reduces that complexity, as I said, to cover more people. But these actually have the effect of being difficult to hold individuals accountable and requires kind of more active management, right? So you spend more money to do this to make sure that they actually get the results that they want, because you have to have more managers, more interventions, more conversations. And it also leads to more misses because no one's really clear who's going to do what in what situation. It also hurts your culture because it leads to finger pointing. Hey, wait, I thought you were going to do this time. No, I thought you were going to do it this time, right? Having clear delineation of responsibilities and narrow tailing those profiles, it leads to a more well-oiled machine, reduces waste, and most importantly, which ties into my last point, makes compensating roles easier. So the last one is around compensation. Comp is hard, right? It's really emotional. It's really difficult. You want compensation to drive the behaviors you want in your organization that you value, right? And give you, and then drive value to you and drive value to your employees. You want it to motivate people. What we see time and again is the compensation plans that try and put too much into them. That's the biggest mistake we see with comp. You cannot solve every problem with compensation. Process, operating model, technology, compensation, they all have to work hand in hand to get your goals in place, right? Because what we see a lot of times is employees making more money than maybe they should when they're gatherers, and you're comping them like farmers or hunters, right? And vice versa. We see hunters comp like farmers because the compensation is too complex or some of these other problems. So use spiffs for short-term wins and specific goals, but the core of your comp program needs to be simple. Creating correct job profiles is important, as I just said, because there are like kind of those fewer edge cases, and because it memorializes some of what you want to accomplish with compensation in your operating model, right? The most successful comp plans we see are ones that are simple enough to be intuitive. And the reason is because team members don't ever even have to think about it. It becomes second nature. And they know how any decision they make is going to affect their compensation. That's what really drives behavior. So thanks for joining me. Thanks for listening to me rant at you for a little while. Question, if you want to learn more about us, check us out on LinkedIn and Twitter at Carrier Direct. I'm at _user prime, and learn more, from our website as well. And I'll open up the floor to questions if we have any.
All right. Looks like we've got a couple questions here. This first one is from Kyle. Let's see. This one's kind of a two-part question. So what are the most effective ways to find out what my people need and want? For example, like surveys, town halls, breakouts. What have you seen to be the best practices?
That's a great question. So I like what you use the examples there, because the number one thing you need to do to figure out what your employees want is just talk to them. And every single one of your examples was talking to them, right? It wasn't guesswork. So for anybody else, who's listening, certainly start by like finding ways to ask your employees. All of those are really, really impactful. What we like to suggest is town halls for the broader organization, something like once a month. And then like team type town halls or smaller town halls, something like every 2 weeks, or maybe once a quarter for your larger town halls, things like that. Follow up with surveys. One thing I like to highlight here is the idea that an always open door doesn't create urgency. So when you tell folks that, hey, my door's always open, come in whenever you want, doesn't create urgency. He's probably busy, I'll talk to him next time. So another really great tip here, create something like office hours, where you would communicate to your team members, hey, I am blocking an hour once a week, and I'm not going to do anything else but talk to y'all. So come on in. Like, that's it. This is the time. You can come anytime you want, but this time is reserved for you. I'm not doing anything else. I'm not busy. That's another great thing that we've seen from top performing organizations, is creating office hours.
All right. This is a question from Nick. How important do you think it is to set goals for outbound sales calls for 3PLs? We want quality calls with quantity, and sometimes we feel we stress quantity too much. Should we be putting a number on this, such as minimum 60 outbound sales calls a day? Any benefits to leave this more open in training and not list a specific number?
That's a really great question. Yes, you absolutely need to be setting benchmarks for your folks. And what you need to think about with KPIs, from what we've seen, KPIs are not about being able to crack the whip over people. This goes back to coaching when I talked about that. KPIs need to be tailored to help you identify where in the process folks are struggling. So so as an example with this call numbers thing, you want to set a reasonable benchmark, because I agree, quality over quantity. You want to set a reasonable benchmark for people to hit. And so that the way you use that is, if they're not hitting it, you actually don't have the information or the data downstream of that to know where or why they're not being successful, right? So you absolutely want to do that. And then the other reason is so that you're not in a situation where employee from a cultural perspective feel like you're treating people differently. So your best performing reps who don't make any sales calls, if they're still in that SDR role, um, right? And like, you're like, oh, I'm not going to bother that guy because he's like making a bunch of money. Well, that creates cultural problems for the rest of your team. It's also why organizational design is really important, to have those roles kind of delineated so that you can hold those people to those KPIs, because you've defined those things. So absolutely, you should definitely be doing that and use it to focus on where in the chain things are breaking down, so you can provide coaching to those people on how to improve their outcomes.
All right. Yeah, it looks like it's it for questions. So if anybody thinks of any questions after this presentation, please just send me an email. You can send an email to education@tinet.org. That'll get to our education team and me. So then I can get those to Ryan. Thank you again for your presentation, Ryan. We look forward to having you back soon.
Yeah, thanks everybody for having me. Absolutely. And thanks for the questions. I'm going to assume that the lack of questions was because I covered everything so perfectly. But Sean, thanks for having us, and certainly looking forward to do it again sometime.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Have a great holiday, and we look forward to seeing you on our Lunch and Learns in January.